And it was pretty clear to me that there was a gap in the conference market for this information that would prove very valuable.
So you were interested in learning or kind of generating this conference just as a personal learning as well, and then obviously to help other people along as well?
Certainly, but I think primarily to be able to spread the word throughout the exploration community about the new discoveries that were being made, ultimately, not only in Australia but throughout the world.
That was Keith Yates, and hopefully this gives you some insight into how the New Gen Gold Conference came about. Find out more about the conference by going to their website, newgengold.com. This episode of the Exploration Radio podcast was also sponsored by the AIG, the Australian Institute of Geoscientists. To learn more about the AIG, the program it supports, or to become a member, please go to aig.org.au. That's aig.org.au. Welcome to Exploration Radio. My name is Ahmad, and on this episode, we're going to find out more about the discovery story of Gruyere with Justin Osbourne and Carl Prentice. Now let's get on with the show. Just to start off, do you guys want to give a little bit of introduction to who you are and how you got to where you are right now? Let's start off with you, Carl.
Yeah, I'm Carl Prentice. I'm a senior geo at Gold Road. I've only ever worked for Gold Road. I left Curtin in 2011, started with the company in August 2011 as an exploration geo out at Yamana, and I've been with the company a little over 10 years. In that time, I've been through several different roles from project geo, spent some time doing resource geology. It was the company's first mine geo. Was able to second to our Gruyere mine with Goldfields, and now I'm back doing a little bit of business development. So
while you say that, did you join the company as a graduate or graduate as in air quotes?
Yeah, I guess we were kind of in the core of the last big mining boom. So Gold Road was the quintessential Eastern Goldfields junior, so we didn't have a formal graduate program. We were just a exploration geo, and that meant manning the rigs. You know, we loved RAB and we loved RC, and that's what we did day in, day out for several years. So that was my grad program to Gold Road.
And so when you look back now, do you remember particularly why you took Gold Road over other companies?
I entered a job advertisement on Seek. And
that seems to be a common theory of people getting into Gold Road, as we'll find out.
And like Seek, you know, they like to be mysterious about who the company is initially. So I applied for the role as through an employment agency specialising in exploration geos and fieldies. Fortunately, when I got called up to go in for an interview to this office in Altona Street in West Perth, it was Gold Road, and I had a good mate from university actually working on the ground in the exploration team. So he kind of gave us a good word, and met with the office manager and one of the company's kind of long-time geos, Paul Sauter, who kind of helped database and some big picture stuff with Gold Road from the very early days. And yeah, a week and a half later, I was flying out to Laverton. At the time, I had no idea really anything about Gold Road. I didn't know much about the project, but after looking over a few maps, seemed like a great mate. And I had a mate from university there, so it was a huge tick.
And that's, I think, usually how most of these things end up working out at that time.
Absolutely.
So how long have you been with Gold Road now?
Just a touch over 10 years.
Yeah, wow.
It was 10 years during Diggers.
Oh, that's good. And so, Justin, do you want to give a little bit of background to who you are and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, so I'm a geologist, 30 plus years experience. I graduated in 1988 from La Trobe University in Melbourne. I had a couple of years, about almost 2 years working up in the Territory, finished work up there and ended up in Kambalda with WMC in 1990. I was there for a number of years working in the gold mines and the nickel mines, and after about 10 years, WMC sold their gold business to Goldfields.
That's right.
And I transferred over to Goldfields at that point, still in Kambalda, and then had a 12-year career with Goldfields where I worked in St Ives. I worked overseas for 3 years in Finland and Oxford, came back to St Ives for another 3 years, ended up then in Perth working in the exploration group, the International Exploration Group, for a number of years in a whole variety of roles. End of 2012, I got a redundancy after, basically 22 years service. Took some time off, did a bit of travelling and worked sort of a little bit of consulting work, and then I thought it was time after about 12 months to get back into industry. And as you do, you apply for a job on Seek, and I applied for It was a role that was just advertised for a junior explorer with a property in WA, and I'd spent a lot of time working overseas and travelling, and so I applied for the job. 15 minutes after putting the application in, got a call from the headhunter. We had a chat. The next day, he said, "Can you talk to the CEO, the managing director, or was it actually an exec chair?" And funny thing about this is, so I'd worked for Goldfields for 12 years, South African company, and a fantastic career there. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a hell of a lot. But I'd worked for South Africans for a long time, and I thought, I don't want to work for South Africans again. So I had this job interview or a phone call. So the phone rings up with this executive chairman.
Yep.
First thing I noticed is a South African accent. Oh no, not another South African. But that was Ian Murray. I went in and met him the next day after that. That was probably a Friday. I got a job offer on the Tuesday, and I started work with Gold Road about 3 weeks later.
So were you looking to move to a smaller company after having been in like big companies?
Absolutely. I'd worked for big companies for 20 plus years, and that was specifically what I wanted, to go back and work for a junior and take everything I'd learnt in the major companies. And there's a lot of really good technical work and a lot of, you're exposed to a lot of good stuff, but you're never exposed to much of the corporate side. And I wanted to just have a bit of freedom away from the bureaucracy which is invariably associated with big companies. So that was a real attraction for the role.
I just find that I think the fact that when you step into smaller companies, I think your decisions that you make tend to have a lot more immediate effect as well. Whereas, big companies, you do great technical work, but there's a time for that machinery to kind of come around, and then, it does that work. In small companies, like you can kind of make a decision, you can kind of see that impact on a much shorter kind of time frame.
You can see results immediately. You can see the results of your work or the results of your decisions instantaneously, where in a big company, especially something like Goldfields is a fantastic company, but it's a big company with sort of a head office in Perth and a head office in South Africa, and so it can take a while for results or ideas or anything to filter through sort of up and back to where you are. The ability to make a decision and make things happen and do it immediately is probably one of the attractions for me of working in the junior space and the smaller space.
And so we also should document that your timing of joining Gold Road is also very good. Do you want to explain why?
Basically just finish off, I guess. I worked for Gold Road for a bit over 8 years, and I just finished up quite recently.
Do you want to give a plug to what are you doing now?
I'm on 2 non-exec roles. I'm board on Matador as a non-exec director. Been there for about 12 months with a project in Canada. That's a really interesting early stage greenfields project with a resource base on it already, 2 million ounces. That's in Newfoundland. Ian Murray is the exec chair of that company. And I'm about to join the board of a proposed demerger. Encounter have got a mostly copper-focused company. They've got a gold project on the West Tanami. They're going to be demerging and floating that off and creating a new company, which will be Hamlin Gold.
Yeah, okay.
So pending shareholder approval and an IPO, I'll be a non-exec director of that company.
Yeah, okay. So do you, just to kind of finish the thought off, do you see yourself going back into major companies or bigger companies?
I don't think I'll go back into major companies. I'm aiming to have a little bit of time off for the moment and probably go back into an exec role on a more junior company.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And now can we talk about your timing of joining Gold Road?
Yeah, the timing was quite interesting. So when I joined, it was really... And what attracted me to the role was it was an exploration manager for a junior company with a huge land package, which was essentially unexplored. And I thought, to me, the opportunity to go and just do some good geology and have some freedom to kind of apply ideas and hopefully make a discovery was really what attracted me there. In between me doing the interview and signing on, it was about a 3-week window then before I started. I was lucky enough that they drilled some RC holes, 7 RC holes at Gruyere, and the day I started, 14th of October 2013, I still remember that day very clearly, was the day they announced the first RC drill results for Gruyere. So timing was impeccable.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
so
you couldn't.
First day on the job, we made a discovery.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, job done. Yeah, that's it. I guess you kind of mentioned the fact that, Kyle, you can kind of talk about a little bit about this as well. Yeah, like I guess what separated Gold Road, you kind of mentioned, Justin, what separated that company, I guess, from other people is that they had this large tenement package, and and they were really going out to kind of explore really at kind of the edge of the world at that point. They really kind of went out looking for this new kind of terrain. Although you came in right about the time when they're obviously done a fair amount of that work. Can both of you guys kind of comment a little bit about how the company got to a point where, it took on that challenge of going out and kind of exploring in what would be considered a very unknown part of WA at that time?
Yeah, I can kick it off. I mean, when I started with Gold Road, like I was only going to work there for 6 months and go back and do my honours at Curtin in sedimentology.
How's that plan going?
Yeah, I might still go back. Probably not though, but I had this wild idea that maybe petroleum geology was for me. A few months of working with Ziggy Lubinecki, I guess kind of the chief geology spiritual leader and one of the real pioneers of Yamana, spending that time on the ground with a guy like Ziggy, this kind of creative exploration genius, me just being an uninformed, no idea what he was doing, young exploration geo. Very quickly we formed a friendship, and Ziggy was a great mentor to a lot of us, and he was like, don't go back and do your honours. Stay here.
Yeah.
He's like, the worst decision you ever made. We'll make everyone rich, stay here. And it was Ziggy's passion mixed with this great unexplored land package that really helped drive the business for a long time. And he had this great team on the ground. For a lot of us, our first time in the industry, we had a big team of young fieldies and young geos, so we weren't a strong seasoned team. Being a junior, we didn't have a lot of procedures or systems, so everything was pretty hand to mouth, done pretty rough like a lot of juniors. We did to the best of our ability, but we did use what we had and did the best we could. And one of Ziggy's big mantras was adapt and overcome. He used to drive that all the time, and he had everyone wild on this idea that we could make a discovery. He joined the company in the early days after the IPO. Russell Davis, who would put together the tenement package, it's ex-Asarco ground, and Russell had worked for Asarco. They wrapped up and wanted to get rid of the Yamana asset. Russell took all those leases, picked up a few more, repackaged it as Gold Road, and then later on he's brought in this guy Ziggy. He's met him, he's heard about him, and he's brought this kind of this exploration guru, mad scientist guy in. And it kind of couldn't have been a better fit, because the ground really needed someone who's just eternally optimistic. Any hole could be a discovery hole and put us on the path to greatness. The Yamana have been long dismissed as undercover, pretty infertile, unlikely to host a big deposit.
Yeah, and I guess that's the reason why I was asking this question is that, for a long, long time, it was considered to be the too hard basket. You're kind of taking fool's money to kind of go out and work there, because it's just not something that typical gold explorers should be doing in WA.
I think that's exactly right. It's a really interesting history, and it's in probably the history of a lot of the pioneer gold belts or districts. It takes a long time to find anything, and there's the notion of what people know and mindset, and it's just Yamana is not a gold district.
That's right.
So there was a pretty common view in Western Australia, especially amongst the kind of the established Yilgarn geologists, that Yamana would not host large gold deposits. It had been explored from the early 1970s, first for base metals. Gold was discovered in early 1980s. Texas Gulf discovered the first gold. They were out there. That was on the Yamana property. And a number of big companies have been out there. So WMC had been out there when I was still working for WMC. Rowan Williams, who was, ended up setting up Avoca and Dacian, he was out there as an exploration geologist. A lot of the WMC geologists quite liked it, but when WMC exited the gold business, they dropped that tenement. Probably the real pioneer was Russell Davis. So he had the tenement with Asarco. Asarco are an American company, copper focused. He basically put together a big land package there for Asarco. There was 2 other juniors out there at the time. Asarco pulled out of Australia, and it was his vision to take the tenements from, it was Xanax and Yamana, and Australian Yamana Gold, and Asarco, and put the whole package together and floated the company. Gold Road, Alacra Mines at the time in 2006. So it was still a long time. So he'd been out there almost 10 years, and he believed in it. 2006 through to 2013 was still 7 years. So he had the vision to do that. They did a lot of work, and Ziggy and the team did a lot of work and made some smaller discoveries along the way. And most of the work was where everyone had explored before along this Golden Highway trend. There's probably 2 real important factors in the discovery of Gruyere, which came out of the earlier work that they'd done. The first was they discovered Central Bore, tiny little deposit, but really high grade. And it was the first time any high grade had been discovered at Yamana. So all of a sudden you went
That's
from
right, yeah.
the whole industry saying, oh, nothing can be found out there, to, oh, there's actually high grade. So everyone kind of piqued people's interest. It became, honestly, it was completely overvalued, maybe overspruiked to some point.
Yep.
But it allowed the company to raise some money. And that was probably the key point in the whole discovery and exploration history at Yamana, in my view, was the money they used and raised. They realised that Central Bore wasn't big enough to do anything with, 100, 200,000 ounces, but it's not something that they could build a mine on. So Ian Murray, and Ian as the chairman, exec chair, and an accountant, I find this completely confounding.
Yep.
That an accountant said, right, guys, stop what you're doing. We're going to step back and we're going to try and understand what is the real potential for this belt. There's no point us just drilling around this same area over and over again. It's like bang your head against a brick wall. You're not going to go anywhere. So he basically pulled back all the exploration activity. With the money that they raised, they flew detailed magnetics over the whole belt. $500,000 survey. So a $500,000 survey for a company that didn't have much money was, I think, amazing. So brave. And then spent over 12 months, once they got that information, on targeting. So they did hardly any work and went targeting with the view to finding where can we go to find big world-class deposits.
Funny you make this point that, when I was kind of doing research and I was looking through kind of the history of releases from Gold Road, it's quite unusual to find this gap in kind of reporting that happened because, there was this corporate kind of shift from that point, because it's a story that's not often followed all the way through. Like companies feel like Central Bore or whatever they have is kind of the best shot, so they'll just persevere until you kind of find, something. But it was interesting to see that if you just follow the company from its releases point of view, there seemed to be this kind of corporate shift to go, no, we're not going to go, we'll park Central Bore for X amount of time and then we'll go to something else. And then, if we don't find anything there, then, the writing's kind of on the wall anyways, and then we all move on. Yeah,
that's exactly what it was. Super brave, a hugely brave decision. And they got pretty short on cash. They got down to probably less than $1 million. They were able to raise some money in an SPP, so a share a rights issue, raised not much more than $1 million. And it was quite a few sort of just private high net worth individuals that put money in. And it was really on the back of that they then went and were able to drill two targets. Done all this work, they came up with about 84 drill targets on the back of this targeting exercise, which took nearly 18 months. Drilled 2 targets, so Yam 14 and Yam 13 or Gruyere were the 2 targets that they went and drilled. And that was partly, this is where luck comes into it to some extent. And I always say, all discoveries have some element of luck or element of serendipity. This was the serendipitous moment, was they were on the middle of the tenement holding, which was on the pastoral lease, which was owned by Gold Road. The rest of the tenement's all on Aboriginal reserve land, which just takes longer to access, to get the land access sorted out. Yeah, that's right. Yep. So there was 2 targets. They had land access sorted out, so the decision was made to go and test those 2 targets with some air core and RAB drilling. And it just turns out that those 2 targets ended up being mineralised.
So Kyle, going on that point, you were in the company at that time. Did you feel the same kind of shift that Justin's talking about?
Yes, definitely. It was, we love putting out announcements, and during that big boom, we were trying to do as much as possible to spruik the projects we had and drive Central Bore and the Attila and Alara projects, which are now renamed as the Golden Highway, plus all our other explorations. So, because
it is important to make that point that, this was still the tail end of that 2005 to 2010 boom, which, arguably, led to a lot of companies doing, things that they probably shouldn't have and all of that stuff.
I guess that the gold price crashing and the end of that boom, kind of late 2012, kind of forced our hand. We were going to do the magnetic survey and the targeting that came with it, but it really forced our change in habit from just going drill crazy. We had rigs at Yamana all year round, and we just went from project to project to project. Get a bit of an anomaly. Assays would come back, get a sniff, rigs would go back, and we just kind of circled the wagon like that for a few years, but never really landed that new discoveries. So while the market downturn was tough for the business and we almost did run out of money, and we had to let go a lot of people at the start of 2013, which made it a really tough time. We were a close-knit little group. There's always been a bit of a family vibe up at Yamana, and Justin mentions the pastoral lease, the the Yamana camp's always been called an exploration camp, but it's more of a farm station. And we did have cattle for a while. We had 200 head of Brahman cross drought masters, so were these kind of gold exploring cowboys, wannabes anyway. But that change in market conditions meant we just couldn't keep doing what we're doing. So getting this amazing new aeromagnetic data set and then all these targets generated by some industry specialists from different disciplines suddenly gave us a framework to go forth and kind of do what we'd been doing with the same energy and excitement and passion. I guess just what we didn't have was the budget for drilling.
Yeah, that's right.
That forced our hand again. It's pretty hard for Ziggy. Like he loved drilling. It's the ultimate test. He loves drilling and then loves getting the geochemistry back from it, and that was all he needed. That and 2 meals a day. So with no drill budget and only a budget for 2,000 soil samples, which we found mildly insulting. We kind of went out with our own like hand-built trailer-mounted auger rig, this gnarly old yellow thing. Someone had welded the torque control like shut, so you could kind of get to a point in your auger hole and you had to commit or you're going to lose your screw. And we set forth and just started testing some of these new targets within the pastoral lease. We could actually get out there. It wasn't that far of a drive from camp. And, the start of as I mentioned, like we'd had to let go of a lot of our exploration staff. So when I say we're going and doing this work, sometimes it was the one of the 2 senior fieldies who kept their jobs. Sometimes it was the pastoralist who didn't like doing it because he wanted to be out at the cattle yard waiting for the cows to come home.
Yep.
Or myself, we out of all that land package, sometimes there'd be 3 of us there for 2 weeks. So whoever could get on the levers of the auger and go and get some samples per day and test these projects, we just did what we did. And fortunately, and as Justin's said, luck took us to Yam 14 and then up to Yam 13 or the Yam 13 redox target and the Gruyere structural target. They ended up being pretty good targets to go after. They weren't the best targets in what we generated. They were just targets available to us, but we'd always liked that area geologically. A lot of work through between 2010 and 2012 there. A lot of close space RAB drilling and a bit of RC.
Yep.
And never really came up with much. So let me put it this way: if someone had told me at the start of 2013 we've just had to let go a bunch of our staff and mates, and everyone's feeling pretty sad about it. Market's died. Ian's telling us we can't raise cash. You got no drill budget. Don't stuff up and go and find the next big one. If someone had told me there and then that we would have put 54 RC holes into a project in the Dorothy Hills Greenstone Belt, would have been the best joke going around that day anyway.
And I think you were quite clear in saying that, because of the way the company was set up, you as a technical team, maybe you were put to the fire a little bit more about, is this really something that we should be drilling? Or, can you come up with something better? Or, work things up more? Having been through that kind of 2005 to 2010 boom, that level of technical discipline on how you should actually work things out, it was kind of lost by the time the end of the boom was coming around because, there was so much money, people were so hungry to do stuff that you were just doing whatever you could because, that illusion of progress of work looked better than actually, taking the view that, we should sit back and really figure out whether this is the stuff we want to do or not.
Yeah, we didn't have that time up our sleeves to sit back and review it for 3 months. We had to propose to the board that we were going to advance this project and test mineralisation at depth. And I guess that's a challenge of exploring Yamana. It's undercover, but it's predominantly stripped weathering profile. So there are areas where shallow exploration drilling can only take you so far before you need to put some deeper holes in it and RC and we love drilling RC at the time. So it was. When we kind of had the initial anomaly from Gruyere and Yam 14, and we'd tried to drill some deeper RAB holes in Gruyere and just got nowhere, and 7-8 metres, the hole was going to refusal. It was not much of a push for Ziggy and I to come up with two drill lines of RC holes to give it a go, and we just had to. Fortunately, we had the directors coming to site. Ziggy kind of got Russell Davis around the corner before we presented our ideas and said, we're going to drill these holes.
Yeah.
Just give us the
just give us a thumbs up. Yeah.
And we'll go and do it. And if it works out, it'll be great. And if it doesn't, well, I was for certain if they didn't come back with the goods, that was it. I'd be packing my bag, you know.
Yeah. So Justin, have you ever talked to Ian about what precipitated that kind of change in the company vision, or like why did he decide that was a good time for the company to kind of take stock of what they were doing and kind of condense it to some kind of a few important things that they should do?
It was probably almost it was a brave decision, but it was almost a last throw of the dice, really. They had to find something which was substantial. He knew, they could have done what a lot of Aussie juniors do, which is find something small, build a mill on it straight away, start the mill up. 2 years down the track, you realise, we shouldn't have done that, and you go broke. And that's happened time and time again. And he was canny enough and smart enough to realise that's not something he wanted to do, and they had to do something to really make a company, and he had a vision of wanting to make a company and leave a legacy. Ian always talked about leaving a legacy for the traditional owners. That was something that he always had really sort of forefront in his mind, is leaving a legacy and not leaving something terrible. In his view, it was the only way that they could really make the company and leave a legacy was to find something big.
Yep.
And that was, in his view, the only way they were going to do it.
So, so we kind of talked about the time, coming up to the RC program that led to the discovery of Gruyere. That was also the time that you joined the company. Do you remember what, coming into this company, obviously that's a fantastic time to come in. You timed it really well. What did you kind of see the challenges when you walked into a place like that? Do you kind of remember walking into the role? What were the things that you immediately kind of thought of that this is what we got to focus on, otherwise it could kind of get out of hand here?
Yeah, look, when I accepted the job, and we hadn't discovered Gruyere at that point, we're just doing a little bit of, they were just, out there doing a little bit of RAB and auger drilling. I thought I was going to be stepping in and doing a lot of targeting work, and I knew that budget was going to be fairly limited, and I started on it was a pretty small salary, and I said to Ian, I'm much more focused on options and salary. Give me some options, and so I was putting a lot of sort of my own IP at risk. But literally, I walked in on the Monday morning, start my first day, and Ian gave me the release that they just put out, which I hadn't seen up to that point. He said, we've just discovered these holes. You're the exploration manager. What do we do next? Because we don't know. Because they'd never discovered anything substantial. So I literally looked at this, and there was sort of, one of the other geos had proposed, there was two lines of drilling 400 metres apart. And there was an idea that they were going to go and infill drill between these two lines of drilling. And you could look at it, and it was two lines of drilling. Mineralisation was really shallow, 2 or 3 metres below surface on one of them. The footprint was over 100 metres wide, so there was low-grade mineralisation over 100 metres wide and really shallow. And I just thought, we need to... I had a background in a lot of resource development. I've worked at mines. I've built projects, sort of, probably my speciality is resource development and understanding geology. First and foremost thing that you always want to do is understand your geology and the big picture. So I immediately said, no, we need to understand what we've got here. So probably within half an hour of starting, I was on the phone. We had one geologist on site, which is Kyle. I rang him up. I said, I still remember this call. I rang him up. I said, Kyle, you don't know me. I'm your new boss. I'm Justin. Those holes that you're about to go and mark out, stop that right now. Plan some holes 200 metres to the north and some holes 200 metres to the south, 40 metres apart or 60 metres apart, however 50 metres apart. Plan up those two sections and get drilling. And if you find anything, step out another 200 metres. And the next day we were drilling extensional holes 200 metres to the north of the discovery line. Then I was up the next week, up on site, and I sat down and looked through all the chips because you were out looking after the rig, so I sat down and looked through all the chips. I had an old binocular microscope which I'd managed to sort of somehow get from WMC somewhere when I left.
There's a few pieces of those equipment floating around.
Yeah, so I took it up with me in my backpack. I looked through all the chips and realised it was different to what they'd interpreted. You could see it was definitely an intrusive, which was unusual. It had arsenopyrite and pyrrhotite in there, which was unusual. So we kind of realised this is not what they'd originally interpreted. It was something far more substantial, and we need to understand how big this thing is. And we just set about that for the next the next few weeks. But I was basically just given free rein by Ian to just do what had to be done, and I did. Yep. And we did, and the team did. Weeks later, we had 1.8 kilometres of strike drilled out to 100 metres on a broad framework, and knew we had something substantial.
So the reason why I asked that question is because I think in the pre-interview notes you sent me, Kyle, you were quite clear in the fact that Justin came in at the right time. Yeah, that because you guys were essentially an exploration company, you needed someone to come in with that mindset about pushing you. Now that you had a discovery, you needed to be pushed in kind of different direction.
Absolutely. I guess when Justin started, the few of us were out there, we were a little bit nervous. Ian had kind of sent an email about this new exploration manager, big company experience. Some of us knew a little bit about Goldfields and Western Mining Corp, but kind of come from that fraternity, and that Justin was kind of a big deal. So we were a little bit nervous, but very quickly there's this nice guy on site who had a plan and worked with us and just set us forth to do what we do. There was no ambiguity, supported us in what we needed to do. And I guess, as Justin said, coming from that resource development and operational background, that's something we hadn't had in-house really inside the business up until that point. So a lot of us didn't really know what a resource drill out looked or felt like. Just to have that technical and, I guess, kind of spiritual guidance through it. And to continue driving it forward. Yeah,
and I think, the part that I find interesting about that is that there are moments where you need, you need people that are really good at looking at kind of the detail on a small scale, but you then need someone to kind of come in and ask you to look on a bigger scale. And I personally find that I think a lot of these kind of discovery stories have those type of people that seem to come in at the right time. Yeah, like the person that put the tenement package together, they obviously had a bigger view rather than just a small view the company that was, dropping a single tenement was. Ian obviously had the view that, we should now go from something small to something big. And I think there's always these kind of moments where, you need someone to kind of give you that perspective, and that allows you to kind of grow it a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think you need that sort of eclectic mix of sort of thoughts and people and personalities to really make a discovery and turn a discovery into a mine, and which is what we're able to do eventually. But diversity of thought is critical.
And I think, the more I think the complicated the problem, you need people, with a skill set of kind of Ziggy, who's, passionate, but perhaps very detail oriented about, consumed by data. And you need people that have the opposite view, let's look at areas that doesn't have data. How do we add data into those areas? And you need this kind of interplay. Otherwise, I think trying to solve a complicated problem is quite tough, I think.
I guess Justin brought a fresh energy, as we've kind of touched on. That 2013 was tough for the team out there. It had been really draining. We didn't know it at any point in the swing could be the end of our role or the business. And we had a few little wins going on. We'd signed JV for South Yamana with Sumitomo. But having Justin come in just after some time off, but with all his experience, he kind of helped reinvigorate us. And that plus there's kind of really the most exciting results I'd seen at Yamana and in my time was kind of really helped relight the fire under all of us. And at that point, by the end of the year, I don't really know how to put it, we were just...
End of the year was a buzz.
Oh, it was huge, yes. No one was working a set roster. Everyone was working. We still had a tiny team.
Yep.
And everyone was just doing whatever we could to get it done to the best of our ability, and it felt great. By the time Christmas come around and we drove some of our old utes back to Perth for their annual service and scrub, we were all knackered, but it was exciting. Like everyone couldn't wait for Christmas break to be over and to get straight back into it in 2014.
It's a funny story about that Christmas break, because every year the company took a Christmas break and had a drilling break, because it's too hot to drill in the summer. It really is. You know, middle of summer, middle of January up there, 45 degrees plus. It's just it's not fair to put people under those conditions. So we always generally finished sort of a week or two before Christmas and have sort of 4 to 6 weeks off and start sort of in February sometime. And we had probably only 13 to 15 people in the company, and we had our Christmas party. So we had that booked at the old Italian restaurant on Outram Street. I can't remember what it's called. So we had the Christmas party booked and we had the whole team there, and in the morning, just before we got there, we got the final batch of assays come through for the last hole we drilled, which Kyle drilled. And I mentioned he drilled it because he stopped it in ore. So we got the best hole that we had probably.
Yep.
The furthest northernmost hole, which gave us about 1,600 metres of strike or something. Can't remember the result. It was, I think, 13 GYRC 0026 or something like that was the hole number. And it was about 30 metres at 3.5 grams, and it ended in ore.
Yep.
And that was by far the best hole we had. So we had to rush out and put an ASX release out for the next day in the middle of doing the party and the Christmas lunch. That's how we ended the year, was on that drill result.
Yeah, but Kyle stopped the hole just because that was the carrot that encouraged people to come back to start working. Yeah,
you've got to tantalize them into the new year, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So, no one's going to walk away from that. So
I still challenge Ian Murray to this day, and I hope he listens to this I'd happily go through that chip tray with him, and he can pick that end hole. It was pretty sheared contact. It was no, very difficult to put your finger on that part of the
it's
ore
okay
body,
it's okay to let it go, Kyle.
I'm not holding on to it, but yeah.
We extended the hole after Christmas and got about another 30 metres, I think.
Yeah.
It was,
you knew what you were doing.
Whatever.
But the interesting thing, that gave us a good break. Funny thing, over that break, typical of Zicky, he doesn't stop for no man, you know. He doesn't stop for Christmas. So over the Christmas break, he went and took the results and he put together a first pass, pretty rough resource model so we could sort of get an idea of what we might have.
Yeah, wow.
And at that point, he came back after Christmas and a first pass, pretty rough resource model, which he did in Micromine, came back at about 1 million ounces. I thought, wow, you know, this is really... And it was open everywhere. It was open at depth and still open along strike. So we knew at that point, we've got to start drilling more aggressively, and started off 2014 on a pretty good note.
Can you talk a little bit about, so obviously, that was kind of the early results, and what happened from that point on? You guys obviously went from 1 million ounce resource to 5.5, whatever we got to at the end.
Probably the critical point. So it was at that point then, so from early 2014, we didn't have any diamond holes into it. We drilled about 50 RC holes and drilled a framework to about maybe 120 or 150 metres deep or something. But we still didn't know what it really looked like. We didn't know how deep it was. So first thing we planned was we got a diamond contract in, Terra Drilling out of Kalgoorlie. They came in and we planned up 4 or 5 diamond holes to drill in as soon as we got back in January. And they were all reasonably deep and kind of drilled down across the ore body to try and sort of get some sort of idea of continuity and depth.
Yeah, to get as good an image of the ore body as you possibly can.
Yeah, and just sort of size potential. And those holes were critical. The first diamond hole we got back, remember, was like 180 metres at 1.5 grams, and it hit a high-grade load in it, sort of 5 metres at 20 grams or something. So we realised that was potential for high grade, and it was extending deeper than we thought, and we got a good look at the mineralisation. So on the back of that and some more RC drilling we did, so by probably mid-February, the RIU conference. RIU in Perth is great. It's always kind of a good stage to kind of get information out early in the year, and so it was really done enough. By that point, we drilled some diamond holes. Everything we were drilling just kept hitting mineralisation. So we did our first capital raise on the back of Gruyere, probably about $15 million or so, at about 17 cents. And then on the back of that was to raise money to do the first resource drill out. So we planned up the resource drill out. It was about 35,000 metres of drilling, RC and diamond. We planned that up. We started that at the end of March. We ramped up. It was amazing. We ramped up from, I think we had about 16 people on site. We ramped up from 16 to 64 people on site in 2 weeks. We went from 2 drill rigs to 8 drill rigs. We got on board. I just went out and we needed people to help supervise. So I got a safety person I knew, Helen Anderson, who I'd worked with at Goldfields.
Yep.
I got her on board to run the safety. Another mate who was running a geological services business, I got him to come up and run kind of the activity on site, just make sure we're doing it all sort of efficiently and effectively.
Yep.
So he
handled more the logistics side.
He basically was the logistics manager, sort of, while I managed stuff down in Perth. We got a resource geo on another guy I worked with at Goldfields, John Donaldson. He came on board to start doing all the resource modelling fantastic job, probably one of the best resource geos out there. So we really were able to really start bringing in some talent. We got a heap of contract geos from BMGS.
It was huge.
We had caravans all over the place, and we had drillers all over the place, and people all over the place. The interesting thing was we didn't have a safety incident in the whole thing. Everybody just did their job. They knew what they were doing. They were well managed and motivated. And I went up and sort of at the start of it, and every couple of weeks went up and kind of just gave information updates on what we were doing to the team up there, and spent time up there. I was on the back of also raising money with Ian and running stuff in Perth, and we literally did 35,000 metres of drilling in about 2 months. We had all of the assays back by the end of May. Set a deadline for the team. I said, we're going to do all of this. We're going to get the assays back by the end of May because we want to get a resource done that we can announce it, obviously, at Diggers and Dealers.
Yep.
As you do.
Yeah.
And we did it. When we got all of that done, I think we ended up drilling about from start to finish from the discovery. There was probably 50-odd thousand metres of drilling. And we announced the maiden resource at Diggers and Dealers, 3.8 million ounces, 9 months after we just drilled the first drill hole.
Yeah, wow. So you've done a pretty good job of kind of leading me into the question that I did want to ask you is essentially around how did the company change in that time? So you're obviously an explorer with very few people. The resource base in that company was very low. And then you had to go through this process of where the company exponentially grows to a much bigger entity. I think that's maybe a thing that people understand, that if you go from X number of rigs to X plus whatever number of rigs, how did the corporate culture in the company have to change along that way? You're obviously an exploration company. Now you're becoming more of a company that's possibly on the development path. So what were other things like around the company from a culture point of view that had to kind of change along as well?
I think immediately we were just always an exploration company, but we knew we had something. So probably for the first couple of years it was we're explorers, and until we understand how big this is, we want to stay explorers. But we did bring in some a bit more technical, probably only fairly late. Probably it was only 2015 where we started doing the studies. So 2014 we did scoping study at the end of 2014 on the back of the first resource. We did all of that in-house. Gordon Murray was our engineer. He basically ran that. Then it was really on the back of the scoping study and started 2015 where we started growing, and that's where everything started growing. Probably one of the things, step back just one little bit, probably the biggest learnings I ever had at Goldfields, and the last role I had at Goldfields where I was in a strategy role looking at the entire exploration project business, which was a global business. We had exploration operations all over the planet. We were doing five studies, scoping studies up to feasibility studies on large scale, up to $10 billion sort of what might have been projects. So one of the things I was asked to do was understand what makes a project work, what makes a project successful. So I spent a lot of time on studying studies and what works and what didn't work. And the key finding of that was, if you're going to do a study, it doesn't matter how big or small, don't ever miss a stage or a step of your study. Do your concept study, do your scoping study, go into pre-fees, but make sure you've got option studies in the pre-fees.
So don't try to get shortcuts, which is what I like.
Don't ever shortcut. If you ever look at all the projects around that mess up, they miss stages.
Yeah, I think that's a surefire way of burning money.
Yeah, so we set out to make sure that we did every stage of the study process. At that point, we probably got Tim Netcher on board, who'd built projects. When we started the studies, he got to study an old bloke, Robert Marshall, who'd built projects all over the place as an advisor. So we started building up that technical capacity. Robin then got Sim Lau in to run the studies. And we ran all of those studies in parallel to continuing to explore effectively. So, 9 months later, we had 5.5 million ounces and we had a pre-feasibility study completed. And that obviously, then we knew that we were going to become a developer. And that's when things really started. We started adding further to the team and bringing in the environmental permitters and metallurgists. And
so the question I always want to ask people is that, there's always this phase, you're an explorer and then you become a developer, and there's a different skill set on the exploration side, there's a different skill set on the development side. So a company like Gold Road, which had this ethos of exploration kind of being the driver that adds value, how do you maintain that when you get to a point where you're becoming a development company? Does it become harder? How do you, as the technical person or the person in charge of maintaining that ethos of what your kind of growth DNA is, how do you maintain that when you get to a point where you're a developer?
My view is with the team, and especially an exploration team, is just continually focus on just technical excellence. It doesn't matter how, you can put all the processes in place and all the company bureaucracies in place and have systems and all of that, but never lose, and that always happens. As a company grows, that's what happens. You put in process, you put in systems, and inevitably will bring bureaucracy and everything else.
Yeah, but you need, like, if you're a company of 4 people and if you're a company of 100 people, you're going to have some processes because it's pretty hard to manage 100 people, right?
But just don't lose sight of 2 things. Don't lose sight of, probably 3 things. Don't lose sight of technical excellence. And technical excellence for exploration geos is geology. Never lose sight of of why we're there. It's to understand geology. Never stop being curious. You always want your geos to be curious and positive, and don't stop having fun. As soon as you stop having fun, then you got to look at why. The interesting thing for Gold Road was we became a developer, but we became a developer through a slightly non-conventional
That's true,
path. Yeah. We were honestly fully expecting to develop the project ourselves. We had bank-approved finance. So we had $400 million of bank-approved finance ready to go. I'd been on the road on road shows for basically 18 months, and we had the instos basically set up, so we could have funded it through debt and equity quite comfortably. In parallel to all of that, we also ran a joint venture process. And at the end of the day, at the end of 2016, when we'd finished the feasibility study and had a good project, we also had an offer on the table for a joint venture, which funnily enough was with Goldfields, who I'd previously worked for. And we chose to go down the JV path. So we became a developer, but with another company basically building the project. Yeah.
So one of the questions I always wanted to ask is, did you consciously look for the joint venture path, or was that a approach made to your company? Like, did you see the joint venture path as a feasible outcome for your company and you already constructed that kind of outcome? Or was it that someone came to you and you went, actually, that's a pretty good fit for us?
No, we set, through our sort of, I guess, strategy workshops and sessions and with the board sort of probably 2 years earlier, we realised there's going to be 2 ways to build the project. It's build it ourselves or JV. And we're not going to settle on one of those paths. We're going to focus on assessing both of those and find out, come to what is the best solution for the company to develop the project and the most risk-free way of developing the project.
Did you get any pushback from your investors going down the JV path?
It was really interesting. Sort of through that stage, through all that like leading up to that, we, right from early 2016, we told all the investors we were looking at all options. Nothing was off the table. We were going to look for, doing it ourselves. And we told them we were running a joint venture process, and that was well known. The investors were, as investors always are, you can never satisfy all your investors. All the instos. One thing I've learned, institutions are only out there for one thing, and that's for themselves and for their own money. And you understand that. So you've got to, as a company and as a director and as a board, you have to do what's right for the company and what you think is right for the company on behalf of all the shareholders. Listen to all the investors, listen to all the institutions, and they've all got great ideas. So take on board what they say and filter out what you think is going to be best for your company. There were instos out there that thought, JV would be a great option. There were some that didn't want to have a bar of it. When we finally did it and when the deal was announced, almost all of the instos congratulated us on the deal that we did. Yeah, because it was kind of a win-win for everybody, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think like the path that you guys took is probably the path that from an investor point of view, de-risked that risk of you guys going alone. The risk that really becomes is if the project gets bigger and bigger and bigger, like for a small company to appropriately scale their resources to try to meet that, becomes a lot harder. Whereas a company like Goldfields, that's their jam. This is what they do. So, so why wouldn't you leverage their expertise as much as you could in that space?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we had a plan, obviously, for operational readiness and a whole big plan to do that. But that would have been a huge job that we basically didn't have to do because Goldfields had had it all there already. They had the operation, they had the systems, they had the operational know-how.
Yep.
The construction was obviously we're all learning somewhat because there's not many no companies have construction teams. Mark Clark with Regis and Capricorn has kind of got a team that they've stuck together and done it regularly. But general companies and large companies don't have construction teams anymore. So construction starts kind of from scratch.
And I think what like from obviously an outsider, what I like about that perspective is that the strategic decision about what you do is more around what you don't want to do either as well. Yeah. So it's not always that, these are the things that we have to do. It's like, well, actually, these are the things we shouldn't do either. And how do you kind of weigh that decision making really? So and I think sometimes, we kind of think that there's only one path, but I think, companies should be a little bit more innovative and go, well, what's our best kind of value proposition here? Our best value proposition is in these kind of three things. So when the bulk of the work is starting to move into these things where our value proposition isn't, maybe we should not go into that space or look for a partner or do something a little bit different in that sense.
Look, that's exactly right. And it was an interesting time when we were doing all the studies and looking at how we're going to build, because there were a few successful projects that had happened and been built, but largely there were a lot of projects globally which had been built very unsuccessfully, and we were continually kind of compared to projects. I'm not going to name any of them, but we were compared to some projects. There was a couple in Canada that were disastrous.
Epic
blew
failures.
Companies up. There were a couple in Perth that in WA that were happening at the same time as us that we were always compared to. Came on just ahead of us, and both of them failed. And I think partly because they missed stages in their studies. One thing that we were very aware of and wary of was just taking on a big chunk of debt and something going wrong during the study or during the build, having some sort of cost overrun, because we could see 2013 to 2015 or 16, it was a fantastic environment to be doing studies. Things just started increasing in price. If we had built a year later, probably would have, estimates of people probably would have added 50 to 100 million minimum. So if we had any cost overrun as a junior with a big chunk of debt, and we would have been going back to the market and raising at significant discount.
That's right.
And as it happened, we did have a cost overrun on the project for a variety of reasons, but fortuitously for us as Gold Road, we'd built a cost overrun facility into the joint venture, and the joint venture partner paid for most of the cost overrun. So we were, there was a whole lot of those mechanisms that were built that. It was a fantastic deal for us.
That's fine. So the obvious question I'll ask, if you had to do it again, would you do anything different?
I often, you often look back and you look at how the mine is operating now and running now, and you think, oh, geez, it would be nice to have all that yourself and not 50-50. But whether you could have built it yourself. On the exploration project side, the development side, I don't know if I would have changed much. It was It ran like clockwork, quite fortuitously, but it ran like clockwork just because there was a bunch of awesome people working on it that just didn't stop, and they would just do anything to get the job done at the time.
I think you made this point, Carl, in our kind of a pre-interview stuff, that the busts are a good time to explore because it forces you to be a little bit leaner in how you do things. But also I think possibly going through kind of a development cycle in a bust is actually probably a much better outcome than trying to go through a boom where you have people retention problems, labor costs are going up, basically any cost of yours is always kind of increasing at some component. So from that point of view, the timing of perhaps when you were actually trying to facilitate this project, aside from the capital side, which is the real problem in kind of a bust,
the people we brought in to the maiden resource drill out all the way through to some of the feasibility studies, that bust meant that there were people with great experience building big open pit operations looking for work. Right now, that'd be really hard to get that select team together. And even thinking about some of the experience of the exploration geos, fieldies, specialist consultants, and even some of the drillers we had up at Gruyere in those early days are primed to kind of have a really good run at it. And it couldn't have been any better. We'd never had so many people on site. As Justin said, there were just kind of caravans and ablutions everywhere. It wasn't easy at times. Like the camp felt overrun, but everyone was just there to do the same job and working really hard at it. And it was such good fun. I don't think I'll ever work on a drilling program as fun as that. And, still a lot of mates out of that. And we got it done in a really short time frame. I think it'd be hard to, maybe those crews of people still exist now, and if we were to go and drill out tomorrow, we could still put it together. But I don't know, it just felt like an absolute dream team. It was.
You couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Now.
Why so?
It was absolute. We had the perfect window to do this in terms of it. As you mentioned, it was kind of the bus time. We did from start to finish, from the discovery through to the end of the feasibility study. The whole thing, start to finish, cost $27 million to get to a 3.5 million ounce reserve and 6.5 million ounce resource. So that's less than $3 an ounce to resource, start to finish.
Yeah, that's unheard of.
It's way unheard of. Even Hemi and De Grey is fantastic, but they're discovering resources at $10 an ounce. We discovered the maiden resource was $1.60 an ounce, and that's because it's a fantastic ore body. But we were able to get all the drillers we needed at the drop of a hat. Assay turnaround was probably a week and a half. We're getting, you're routinely getting sort of weeks to months assay turnarounds now.
That's right. Yep.
We were able to go from, that ramp up. We were able to get like 10 or 15 geos on site at the drop of a hat. All the resources and extraordinary skills were available to us, and it was just the absolute perfect timing to do something like this. Right now, we're back to where we were sort of late 2000s. You can't get drills very easily.
That's
the
right.
Assay turnarounds are terrible.
Yep.
Wages are sort of booming again.
Yep.
It was just, there's no way could you do what we did as cheaply and as efficiently and as quickly as we did it.
And I think, to me, the kind of the lesson out of that ends up being is that when you don't have that pressure, that cost pressure, whatever that cost pressure is, whether it's labor, time, assays, anything like that, what it allows you to do is to make timely decisions, because right now there's so many kind of complications in the process, like labs are running behind, drilling crews are hard to find, all of that stuff. That inevitably makes it really hard for you to put that, all of those cogs in a way that will allow you to give the information that you need to kind of make the decisions as you go along.
Yeah.
When you remove that aspect, I think, the fact that you can get information in a timely manner possibly allows you to be, make better decisions, right? Because you're not always kind of waiting for something, and you're not always kind of trying to fight the tide in some way to kind of get, what information you need.
Yeah, that's right.
As an industry, sometimes we kind of look at these, projects that don't go right, and maybe we don't quite talk about the aspect that, like sometimes, it's that like Swiss cheese model. You just need kind of the things to line up, and if one of them slightly out, maybe we don't quite comprehend how big an impact it can actually have on that whole process.
Yeah, I think the ability, the importance of having good quality people and technical people as well, and it was kind of chaotic at the time. But I mentioned, we had no safety incidents at all. But that was probably because of the quality of the drillers and the drill supervisors.
That's right. Yep.
3 or 4 years later at Gold Road, we probably were having more safety incidents than what we had during that chaotic time, despite having systems and processes in place.
Yep.
But it's probably because the quality and the experience of the drillers and the people on site is far less.
That's right.
Despite having all of the systems in place.
Yep.
We had really good quality drillers and supervisors, and they knew what to do, despite sort of what appeared to be a fairly chaotic environment with people running around doing lots and lots of work.
That's right.
It was fantastic.
I mean, if you think about kind of an environment where you should have, possibly safety incidents and things like that, that would be the archetypical example that people would, talk about. Doing a lot of things in a short amount of time, you would expect things. But, that's a great point, that the fact that you didn't have them.
I mean, being on the ground at that time, we'd had this really core group of drillers we'd worked with for years, and all of a sudden, we've got all these new geological consultants technical consultants, all these contract fieldies, and drillers we've never worked with before. We had a few different companies to make up the rig volume under different kind of subcontracts and banners, and it kind of felt like something should have gone wrong. Guys not getting on, too competitive, just driving back and forward. Gruyere to Yamana's it's a leisurely 45-minute drive on a pretty dusty,
terrible
sandy road.
Yep.
When you're driving there in the morning, you're looking directly into the rising sun, and when you're driving home, you're looking directly into the setting sun. So ideal when you've got 8 rigs worth of team and fieldies and people coming back from work and heading to. And it just couldn't have gone any better. The competition between the drillers was the morning entertainment of who knocked off the most meters that morning and who could proudly chalk it up on the board, or who'd brought shame upon their family and rig and team. And in the core yard, it was a shantytown core yard. It was 44-gallon drums on rods and shade cloth pulled kind of in different directions and flapping around in the wind. But everyone just got on and did it and had a great time. It's a really special part in the company's history, I think, and associated with the maiden resource drill out.
Yeah.
Well, what's end up kind of.
So the question for you, Kyle, I mean, you're in the, I guess, enviable position of being someone that, saw it from day one all the way, and you're still involved in the project now. I mean, what do you, what are your thoughts on this project? Now that you look back over that 10-year journey in the company, what are things that kind of come to your mind?
I mean, personally, there's a few things, if I could go back, just little things we missed out on that we could have done better in terms of that, reaching for technical excellence, data we didn't collect.
The hole you stopped in mineralization.
The hole I stopped.
That,
I'm trying to let go of that. I wish I'd spend a bit more time trying to understand the geology itself. It kind of, as the drilling really ramped up and models went on, like at times where I was able to contribute to the model a little bit, but I wish I'd spent more time working on that and a little bit less on designing drilling and some of that on-ground technical stuff and rig management. And then going to work at the mine, I don't know, I've still got still thinking a lot on Gruyere, but yeah, I wish I could have done a little bit more on the model personally.
Yep. Just to have more involvement in that process?
Just to have driven it more. I guess hindsight, like some of the data we didn't collect, I wish we'd collected at the time, but that was kind of driven by circumstance and what we needed to do against kind of what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We should take more photos.
The photographer.
I think there's just a lot of great people and times out there, a lot of candid moments that kind of get lost in the drill season. It's photography in those sort of work programs is really important to me. It's to paint that kind of picture of the time and people involved. It's the people who really make these projects.
Yep. I mean, I think, like I said, I think the fact that you have been involved in this project from obviously seeing pre-discovery, the discovery, the development, and now into production. Obviously, the most people struggle to find things, but to actually find something that gets into a mine, that's always a great position to be in.
I guess I was really fortunate for Gold Road to hang on me, and there were times it was really tough, and after really busy drill seasons, you can have the wind kind of knocked out of you and lose a bit of that energy after years and years. That discovery to maiden resource, that was a really exciting period and a huge buzz, but it's really busy as well. There's a lot of big swings and a lot of late nights. And then for the years after and then rebooting kind of Yamana exploration once we'd packaged Gruyere off to the technical team to do their studies. So I guess to be able to stick around and to have that experience to see the discovery to mill process. There were times where I wanted to throw in the towel and like he had mates and bosses like Justin and Jono and Clayton Davies and Jane Levitt to reel us back in. I don't think I'd be here today or would have had the experience I would have if I'd, in motions of kind of times of being tired and a bit over it and thrown in the towel, and if I'd left would have thrown away some pretty good opportunities and learning experiences. So it's just sticking it out.
Yeah, fair enough. So something lighter. At the end of our interview, we always ask, I guess, 2 questions. So the first one is, what is something that you think needs to die in mining? It could be an idea, a concept, a behavior that you think we need to get rid of out of our industry. So you go ahead first, Justin.
Look, it might be a bit sort of cliche or topical or whatever, but misogyny, sexism in mining needs to go. We need to employ more people, women, and diversity. We need to provide an environment where they can work comfortably, and we can't lose them. There's so much talent, female talent in the industry that we lose for a whole variety of reasons.
Yep.
We've got to do better.
Cool. Great one. Kyle?
For me, it's kind of stemming out of my new role in business development, but it's kind of a geological bias towards bigger areas with this belt scale terrain, but I find it really, really confusing when you're chatting to people in our industry and talking about these bigger underexplored areas that have never seen contemporary exploration. When I mean contemporary exploration, like really deeper drilling, busting through the surface. And you kind of ask why they've never been explored, and it's there's no gold there, mineralisation models and analogues. But we proved that wrong time and time again. We did it at Yamana for a long time. There was the Yamana terrain and the Yamana and Dorothy Hills greenstone belts were never posed to hold a multi-million ounce resource, and we've proven that wrong. And Gold Road are trying to prove it wrong again, that it can hold more than one. Just whether it's within Australia or different areas of the world. But when it comes to gold exploration, the more someone tells you that an area that is underexplored is not prospective for gold, for me, that's a huge driver that it probably is actually pretty great, and somebody needs to get in there and work. It's just that bias.
The bias in being model driven in certain areas?
Maybe model driven. Models and analogues are really important, but there is a point where you need to go and test it as well, when they become concrete fact.
Yeah.
And as geoscientists and particularly exploration geologists, those statements shouldn't carry much weighting until you've got some results to back it up.
That's all right. No, I think that's a good one. So the last question. So conversely, what is something that you think we should maintain in mining at all costs? Something that's fundamental to our DNA that we should never forget.
Curiosity. People need to be curious, and I think we're losing that. There's so much information available. There's just information overload and sensory overload, and I think it's quite easy for people to stop being curious about what they're looking at or what they're doing or what they're learning, and it's too easy to learn false information. There's so much out there, and Google and Wiki. Don't always trust what you read, but be curious about everything you see. And I think there's a lot of people out there and a lot of young geos that aren't quite as curious as they could be, and not questioning about what they see and thinking about it. It's something I've been trying to drive for the last probably 5 years, is just a drive for curiosity in what you're doing.
Do you think in kind of the big corporate cultures that we have, do you think it's possible to maintain that kind of curiosity and creativity, that ability for people to test themselves when we are becoming a lot more administrative in the way that we handle people and resources in companies?
It's much harder. It's definitely much harder. And I think in the bigger companies it becomes harder and harder still. I had a lot of conversations about this with sort of some of our general manager of capability and culture at Gold Road. We used to talk about this on a regular basis. Is how do we drive that curiosity?
Yep.
And stop it being stifled by process and system, which process and system very, very easily stifles curiosity and creativity if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's right. We become a little bit more about, always trying to find the square peg that has to go into that square hole. And I always think that, maybe I'll be interested in your perspective. So as a manager, do you think that you have to take on a little bit more in the fact that you have to figure out a way of having these kind of disparate people in your company, like Ziggy, or, like, do you have to accept that, they, like, for all intents and purposes, let's call these people a little bit of a pain in the ass to manage? Do you have to take on that responsibility as a manager to some degree?
Absolutely. And don't stifle it, I think, especially in geology needs creativity, and it needs to have some of the weird geos out there. It needs to have some of those weird minds, because they're the ones that are going to come up with the zany ideas which are going to amount to something.
That's right.
So you need to, as a manager and a leader, you need to ensure that you're creating and allowing diversity in the team and diversity of thought as well.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you start getting, if everyone's the same and it's just all group thought, you're not going to be successful in anything.
Yeah.
So embracing those creatives is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And being they're hard to manage, really hard to manage, but you've got to be prepared for that and put your hand up to manage it, and fight for them as well. Fight against the other forces in companies that might say, oh, they're a bit weird, or they're behaving badly, or they might be behaving badly. It might look bad, but it's not.
It's not malicious,
or it's not bad or malicious. It's just
it's just their personality.
Makeup of people. You need to have those people, and you need to manage them and fight for them.
That's a great point. All right, Kyle, what would you maintain in our industry?
This big innovation push. There's a lot of amazing work being done about different analytical techniques, machine learning, data learning, but what I'm really enjoying seeing is, and it kind of leads on to what you were both talking about then, is facilitating this creative time for geos and harnessing this curiosity, or promoting it. And I want to see more. There's some great stuff being done, but driving further in innovation of management and geosystems. Now, that sounds really boring, but geology roles now, exploration or mining, the administration and reporting is becoming pretty crippling. And it really, that time you get to have that creative time to just look over data, with no time frame, go and relog something. It's really starting to be whittled down by all these administrative responsibilities. I'd like to see innovation drive more kind of one-stop shop management and reporting systems. And look, there's a lot of people doing this stuff, so maybe I haven't seen it, but I think that would be a really great space to help facilitate that pure, unobstructive geology time.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is fair in the fact that, in the world where we want to measure things, it's often hard, not often, it's almost always hard to measure the direct product or impact of creative time, because it's a non-linear process. It's not like if you spend an hour, then you're going to get an hour's worth of kind of product out of it. You might spend a week and get nothing, or you might spend an hour and get a lot. So there's this complete disparity in how that works. And in a measurable world where, like, everyone wants to measure, like, did you make 10 widgets today? Like, it's a pretty hard kind of thing to kind of create in that organization.
The modern exploration geologist can wear a lot of hats these days, and in a smaller company you can also be equal parts database and tenement management and reporting, and they're all great experience to learn and to know how to execute, and important to the business. But it's kind of funny when you map out what a day and a week might look like with your key responsibilities are measured and you do need to achieve for the business requirements. And then the things that you can't quantify their value, but we know from history and other discoveries that it's that time that you can't put a value on, it's unquantifiable, it's really important. And when that's being reduced in your data only a little bit, something's really wrong with that.
Yeah. So one last question, which we're kind of trying to ask people, is what's your greatest travel story? Is there a story that comes to mind first? You guys can go. Whoever comes first.
You go, Justin.
Any travel?
Yeah, anything. Could be personal, could be work. Anything that you find. Yeah, if I said, give me your best travel story, what are you going to lay out there?
Oh God. I've traveled. I need to think about that one.
I can jump in with one while Aussie's thinking. Just before I graduated mid-year at Curtin, which is kind of odd. had a few units to finish off that I had the pleasure of redoing.
Yeah.
Not to mention structural geology. But it was fortuitous.
It's good that you work on a structurally hosted gold deposit then, so that's excellent.
We've got specialists for that now, fortunately.
Yeah.
Great learning opportunity.
Yep.
But Curtin, for the first time in conjunction with the Rio Tinto Centre and the director there, a Russian guy, Vladimir, had kind of partnered up this weird science kind of conference summit program in central Siberia in Tomsk.
Okay.
It's kind of focused on climate change affecting geomorphology in the Altai region.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there were just posters up around the different science department units, and you could apply to go over there and be part of this summit. Not being a geomorphologist or having some interest in sedimentology at least, I wrote a little abstract and a submission and somehow managed to fudge my way into a AGSO-funded student trip to central Siberia in summer, mind you, the beautiful month and a half of sun they get.
Yep.
And it was unreal. This university that was, I think the building was just a tad older than colonial Australia, hosted us for this kind of 2 days of translated conference.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spent a week kind of camping and travelling all the way down to the Russian Altai Mountains, in which the university, Tom State University, that hosts us, have a glacial research centre up there and a school of mountaineering. So if you're a university student, you can spend your university break learning to mountaineer.
Excellent.
A pretty commonplace extracurricular activity for them.
I mean, what else would you do in central Siberia?
And I mean, just the whole trip up there, while we were on the main roads, we were just in a regular travel bus and these kind of amazing campsites by these rivers in these big glacial floodplains. But then it was going up to the mountain where it all changed. The bus parked in the middle of this huge flat grassy plain, and we could see the mountains and the glaciers behind us. And then parked there were 4 ex-Soviet Union Russian trucks. No seats, all us 20 students, some from Europe and the rest from Curtin, piled into the back of this just metal box. There was a small potbelly fire in the corner.
Yep.
And then started a 4-hour descent of this 8-cylinder diesel vodka-powered truck into the mountains. And it was a truck designed for driving, so there was no real road up there. They were just kind of winging it.
Yep.
And gee, did we felt it. I think everyone hit the roof at least half a dozen times. There were a few mild concussions and a few bleeding heads by the time we got up there.
On the plus side, you're not going to remember the drive anyway, so you'll be fine.
We'd also taken enough of Russia's finest little water or the clear spirit to soothe their pain. But that was amazing. That was actually my first time overseas. Turned 22 in the mountains, and just a great group of people climbing up the glaciers every day, trying to converse with Russian geologists and geomorphologists where there was just a 99% language barrier, but just lots of gesticulating about specimens. It was a time of our life.
Yeah, wow. Jeez.
Awesome.
Justin?
I've thought. So mine was probably 1993. I got married. So my wife was another geologist at WMC. We got married. We were lucky enough to get some leave without pay from WMC from Kambouda, and we went to Europe for a 3-month trip. And it was our first time overseas for both of us. She's Croatian background, so during that trip, we just drove around Europe. But during that trip, we went to visit her family in Croatia. So Croatia in 1993 was in the middle of the Yugoslav breaking up. It was in the middle of the war.
Yep.
So we went to visit her family in northern Croatia, up near the Hungarian border. It was the mother side of the family. We stayed with them for a few days, and then we were going to drive to see her uncle on her father's side, which was down on the islands in the Croatian Gulf. So we were told, sort of, go this way. Just sort of were given a rough route, and we just had it. In those days, there was no GPS. There was no, it was all paper maps.
Yep.
So we jumped in the car and we drove down to see her uncle. And on the way, we went through we were told, go around, don't go right into Karlovac, sort of go past this town. So we were driving along and past Zagreb and then down, and we started seeing sort of a bit of smoke around the place. And driving, what's going on here? I'm not sure how close to the warfront we are, but we were driving along, and then we started seeing trucks driving along with sort of army trucks and tanks on the back, and turned out we were probably about 10 kilometres from the warfront. We saw when we started seeing big convoys of trucks, we thought we better. So we drove around and further around, and we managed to get by that. But we were extraordinarily close to what was an active war front at the time. We had no idea.
Yeah, this sounds like the plotline of like a Mr. Bean episode.
So we finally got down sort of around Rijeka, which is right up the top of the Gulf, around onto one of the islands where I had to get a ferry across to the island. We didn't have a lot of cash at this point, Croatian cash. So gave them some money, ferry onto the island and down to the island and got to her uncle. And it turned out we had no idea. So they were displaced from Vukovar, which is right over on the Yugoslav border, Serbian border. So the uncle and his wife and daughter and 2 grandchildren were staying in a hospital which had been turned into a hostel.
Yep.
So we stayed with them for a few days.
Oh, far out.
So during this time, we were watching the news each afternoon, and the Serbians were coming up the coast. They had boats out there, and they were like bombing Dubrovnik and the bombing sort of Split. And they were coming up the coast. We were right up the north, and it was just getting closer and closer. And they were all talking Croatian. I had no idea what was talking, no idea what was on the news. My wife would tell me every night, "Oh, they're up to Dubrovnik. They're coming closer." It's like, what should we do? I think we should get out of here. But there was only like one ferry a week. We couldn't get off back off the island. So we were waiting for the ferry. And then I got a little bit crook while we were there as well, and ended up with some sort of stomach ailment. So I was crook and it was bizarre. It was this hostel, but on this like beautiful Croatian island, crystal clear waters. We could go swimming every day, but they were living on hostel food. And then Serbian army or navy was getting closer and closer and closer, and then we could hear sort of planes at night and all sorts of stuff. And I still remember so clearly this day we were sitting around in they had this tiny little kitchen. They're all in like 2 rooms together.
Yeah.
So we're there having a cup of tea, and we heard this like an explosion. We thought it was a bomb. So my wife and I, Janet, we jumped under the table. We were hiding under the table. What's going on? And they all started laughing and laughing. I said, what's going on? And they said, USA, USA. And I said, what's going on? The noise was a USA jet fighter pilot or jet plane flying over the top of us and breaking the sound barrier, the sonic boom.
Oh,
US had just decided then, that day, to basically join the war. They flew in. Jet planes came in and shooed the Serbians away. That was the day they basically saved Croatia. Basically ended the invasion of Croatia.
Jeez. What a way to start your marriage. So that's excellent.
We managed to get off the island.
Yeah, if you can survive that, you'll be fine. That's a brilliant story.
Yeah, it was remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, a fascinating time, I think, obviously in that area, the Yugoslavian kind of country or, like the region had been held together for so long. It would have been a fascinating time to be there at that time.
Oh, it was. It was quite amazing.
Yeah.
Quite horrific. There was some terrible stories. Cousins lost and all sorts of stuff. But
I mean, a lot of those wounds are still there now, and the way
absolutely.
the countries are still kind of, not really dealing with each other in probably the best manners. But yeah, that's a great story. So that's it, guys. That's it. Us done. So thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
This episode of Exploration Radio was brought to you by Ahmad Salim and Steve Beresford. Produced by Sean Jeffrey, edited by Humayun Mir, and recorded live in August 2021. This episode of Exploration Radio was sponsored by the One-to-One Group and The Assay. Find out more about them on our website, explorationradio.com. If you like this podcast, then consider becoming a sponsor to help us continue producing more of this content. You can email us on info@explorationradio.com or reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. Until next time, let's keep exploring.
So now you want to know why the deposit is called Gruyere? Well, here's how to explain why.
Yeah, that's a good one. When we completed the targeting exercise in 2012, that ultimately led to the targeting of Gruyere, or the targeting across the entire Yamana belt. Part of the targeting exercise was structural targeting, and we had a few industry specialists work with the business to generate those targets. And they needed a naming scheme, so they appropriately used beer and cheese as the scheme to name all the targets, and Gruyere was one of them. There were actually two targets that sat over the Gruyere area. One was a structural target called Gruyere, and the other one was a Doug Haynes Redox target called Yam 13. So Gruyere was the slightly more attractive name. Yam 14 was the target and the small discovery we made just pre-Gruyere to the south of the deposit, and then the Yam 13 and Redox target, and then kind of overlapping with the Gruyere structural target. So Gruyere was the name that stuck around early on, and then I guess once it was out in the market, that's what it was always going to be known as. And definitely once the cheese-based puns started rolling in, it was pretty set in stone.